Oh no, go back. That's the only problem with the touchscreen.
Oh, I should have taken this off.
Tony, did you make her a co-host?
Please.
I will
I
not.
can't. Yeah, I can't.
Uh-oh, we've got somebody in Teams, Samantha. She's from the mayor's office, by the way, so if you could correct
Okay.
that. There's a button that you have to push when you schedule a meeting to take it off of Teams or to make sure that it's not in Teams.
Okay.
Because the
Yeah.
same thing happened to me, by the way, but just out of habit, I almost pushed it myself.
Okay, let me forward them the link, actually.
Evening. Happy Wednesday.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We'll get started in just a few moments.
Good evening. Happy
Good
Wednesday.
evening.
Good evening. It's good to see you, Miss Mabry.
Can you see me?
Yes,
really-
thank
Ooh.
goodness I
Oh,
can.
there I am. I was looking all over the screen for me. How's everybody?
Hi.
Doing very well, thank you.
I have COVID.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you feel well. You
I'm
sound
feeling much better now.
good.
I'm
You
into
sound and you look
my
good.
fourth day. So the vaccines work
Well, thank goodness for that. I'm glad
For
you
me.
feel well.
for me because I didn't have a rough time, just 2 or 3 days of bad time.
Glad to hear that.
Thank
All
you.
right. Samantha, were you able to get the message to the folks in Teams?
That's what I'm doing right now.
Okay. I can probably join from my phone and
Hello, everybody. This is Virgil. How you doing?
Hi, Virgil. How are you?
I'm doing good, Leah. You doing okay?
I cannot complain.
You look good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a while. We need to get out and see each other for a change. We need to have some kind of outside
has
activity
been
or
a while.
something. Yeah, it's been too long, like
I'm
2
ready.
years or 3 years or something.
Let's do it. I'm ready. To everyone that is already here, we'll get started in about 1 minute. I think we had a mix-up with the link, and there were some people who are in Microsoft Teams waiting for this class to begin. So we're going to give them a minute to get over here. And we'll get started with intro and stuff at 6:05, which is in less than a minute.
All right, good afternoon.
Good evening. I hear Mr. Ross. I don't
Yes,
see you, but I hear you. How are
Yes.
you, Mr. Ross?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you, sir.
I want a message.
Okay, so it's 6:05. I'm going to go ahead and mute all the microphones, and then we will get started. Mute all current. Yes. All right. Good evening, everybody. I am Leah LaRue, and I am an assistant director in the Department of City Planning. I am thrilled to be joined tonight by two of my colleagues, Samantha Terry, who is our program manager for education and training initiatives. Sam, you want to say hello to the folks? She's on mute, but she said, hi, everybody, and she waved. Tony McNeil is our program manager for outreach and engagement. Tony.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, and Samantha is from the Mechanicsville neighborhood in NPUV. Tony is from the West End neighborhood in NPUT. And I am Leah from the Grove Park neighborhood in NPUJ. And we're thrilled to be here tonight. I'm most excited tonight because pretty excited about parliamentary procedures. It's one of my favorite classes, actually, as nerdy as that might sound. But I'm also excited because we have those of you who have been with us for a while are probably familiar with our former instructor for this class, who is a registered parliamentarian by the name of Dennis Conway. Dennis Conway has moved on to other territory and is unable to serve us in this capacity. I know, Amy, it's so sad, right? But let me tell you about the good news. The good news is that he referred to us one of his greatest colleagues ever, who is also a professional registered parliamentarian and is just as knowledgeable as Mr. Conway is. And he's thrilled to be with us tonight. He's already been helping us on some parliamentary inquiries, and he is prepared to teach this course. He will actually probably tell you, I won't beat him to the punch too much, but he'll probably tell you that he has worked with the MPUs before. Those of you who have been around for a good long while may remember sitting in a class with him. So he's familiar with the MPU system. That is always helpful. And his name is Todd Crowder. He will talk to you in just a moment. I am going to go ahead. I was trying to stall while Samantha pulled up the presentation, but I don't see it up yet. So I'm going to move right on in and try to freestyle off the top of my head. I usually start with a thank you for being here in the intro. And then from there, I move into a quick note about technology. We've all been doing this for almost 3 years now, just a little under 3 years. And so I think you all already know this, but just in case you don't, or in case I need to manage expectations, I want to let you all know that we are all operating tonight at the mercy of technology. That means that if someone loses a connection or sounds really garbled or radio staticky or whatever the case may be, please do be patient while we try to work through that. It doesn't happen often. It has happened, I think, 2 or 3 times that I can remember, and it's pretty mortifying. I hate when it happens, but I also acknowledge that I don't get to rule technology. Technology rules me. So every once in a while, something goes wrong. If that happens, please do be patient with us while we try to get that together. Please keep your microphone muted at all times. That really helps us manage the flow of information without any feedback or background noise that you may not even realize your microphone will pick up and communicate to everyone else. Please keep your camera on. If you're in this class to receive credit for any reason, whether you're a part of the Citizen Planner Certificate Program or you're here to take advantage of the training incentive for the Community Impact Grant, or for any other reason, if you need credit for this class, your camera has to be on at all times. If you have a question to ask during Q&A, please raise your hand to get in the queue, and we will call on you in the order in which you raised your hand. And last but not least, our golden rule, those of you who have been around for a while already know this. All questions must be relevant to course content. One of the most common bits of feedback that we get for our NPU University classes, so we get tons of positive feedback. I think we have 95% positive feedback for 2022, sorry. But when people have negative feedback, it's usually centered around people kind of hogging the microphone or taking the opportunity to ask questions that are only relevant to them or only relevant to a small number of people. So please make sure your questions are not political in nature. are not driven by a personal agenda of some sort and are only designed to clarify course, content, or matters of parliamentary procedure. All right, so tonight's class is an intro to parliamentary procedure. We're going to talk about very, very basic parliamentary procedure tonight. And I think the second part of the class is also, we combined two classes for this one. Is that correct, Sam? This one is the two? Okay, so we combined two classes. So Mr. Crowder who will take the mic very shortly, will be covering all of the things that you need to know to be a good and a good member of your NPU or your neighborhood association or really any other organization of which you're a part, but also to make sure that you're empowered to participate in your NPU, your neighborhood association, or any organization of which you are a part. It is very important that you understand one of the things that I see so frequently from NPU meetings and neighborhood meetings is that people often leave disgruntled or frustrated, and then they'll send me an email or send their council member an email talking about some injustice that occurred at a meeting or someone was disenfranchised, et cetera. And the first question I'll usually ask was, does anybody make a motion? Did anybody make a motion? Oftentimes the answer to that question is no. Your power in your meeting is through parliamentary procedure for sure. If you're a member of that body, you need parliamentary procedure in order to act out or live out your right as a member of that organization. So Mr. Crowder will get to that momentarily. One thing I will say for those of you that have taken the intro class before or several times before. Oh, thank you, Sam. I'll show that in a second. I'm glad you did that because I forgot. But for those of you that have taken this class before, or maybe even several times before, I see a lot of familiar faces. I know that there are folks that take every single parliamentary procedures class that we have. You all are my witness. No two parliamentary procedures classes are alike. These classes, every time I take one, and I've taken every one that we have produced, I learn something different every single time. I trust that you will too. If you have not already grabbed a notebook or a pen or something to take notes with, please do that now. This is a good time to take out your notebooks and your notes app or whatever it is that you use to jot down notes so that you will be prepared to jot down any questions that you may have in between as well. All right, if you don't know how to raise your hand, there is a button at the bottom of your screen, or should be, that says reactions. You'll click on the button that says reactions. A small pop-up will appear. And at the bottom of that pop-up, you will see a button, a pop-up that says raise hand. If you click on that button, it will raise your hand and place you in the queue. We will, when Mr. Crowder gives the signal by asking if anybody has questions or anything like that, we'll look through the list to see if there are any hands raised and call them out in the order that they were raised. I believe that is it for me in terms of my intro, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all. I forgot to say thank you all for being here. Very glad to have you and glad to produce this class for you. All right, Mr. Crowder, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that introduction. Yeah, I believe my course will be different. Samantha was kind enough to send me Dennis's recording of his presentation last year, so that gave me a good feel of how these things go. And yeah, that centered on motions, and I have a whole lot to say about motions, but also other topics that I'd like to get to as well. And yeah, if we get to it, the part I have on bylaws, I actually presented that to the NPUs back in 2015. A few people may remember that. I think about 5 of us from the Georgia State Association of Parliamentarians came and presented. I believe it was at City Hall. It was at one of those city buildings downtown. And it was a great experience. I was actually a member of an NPU back in the early 90s. I went to one meeting once. That was how I found out about them. There was a restaurant looking to be rezoned. And so I went to that meeting. It was fascinating, but we moved out of that neighborhood right after that, so I didn't get to continue with it. I live in Marietta now. But I am currently the parliamentarian of the Georgia State Association of Parliamentarians, which is a great job because I don't have to do all that much, but I get to sit beside the president. She's the one with the hard job. But so I have the second best title and hardly any work other than sitting and watching her and telling her when she's messing up. But Dennis and I go way back. He's one of the first people I met in the association when I first joined in 2013. I became a registered parliamentarian and a professional in 2014, back to back. I was enthusiastic. Once I got my RP, I knew I wanted to be a professional. I only recently became a full-time professional. It took me a little while to escape the insurance industry, but now that's what I do full-time, is serve parliamentary clients. That said, let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen here, and we will get started with the lessons. Okay. Everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Okay. We will, if we have time, get to all of this. If we don't, it's okay. I like to have more material than I need and not less. That way we don't have any time wasted with nothing to do. Now I did it sort of along the lines of an inverted pyramid, the way a news story is. I put the things that I really, really want to get to first and the things that are a little more dispensable down at the bottom. But you will have access to all of these slides later. They will be sent to you. So everything I have to say, including bylaws, the last one, that will be available to you later, even if I don't get to talk about it today. And first bit will be, what is parliamentary procedure? It is the name given to the tradition of rules and customs used for decision-making by a deliberative assembly. And that's what the NPUs are, is a deliberative assembly. Deliberative assemblies go way back, back to the English Parliament. Most of the rules of parliamentary procedure flow naturally from and constitute a logical application of the basic principles, such as majority rule, minority rights, and civility. When you get to a certain point in the study of parliamentary procedure, you will find that bearing the principles in mind will enable you to remember the rules better, because once you understand the principles, you start to understand why every rule exists. And once you understand why it's there, it's a lot easier to recall. It's not simply you're memorizing a list of random things. For example, one rule of thumb, I know that the motion for a previous question, which is the motion you make to end debate, takes a 2/3 vote, because I see it all the time. A similar related motion would be the motion to extend debate or the motion to limit debate. That takes a 2/3 vote. It's not debatable, similar to the motion for previous question. I hardly ever see that one, but I know that it's 2/3 vote and not debatable, because anything that interferes with your right to debate has to take a supermajority, and it can't itself be debatable, because that's an absurdity. If someone proposes, let's stop arguing about this now and move immediately to a vote. Okay, well, I want to argue about whether to stop arguing. That would be absurd. So motions that affect debate are themselves not debatable. Parliamentary procedure originated with the English Parliament and came to the US with the first European settlers. It became uniform in 1876, same year the telephone was invented, when Henry M. Robert published Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised 12th edition, is the basic handbook of operation for many organizations, but there are other parliamentary authorities. Any questions?
Mr. Ross?
Yes, so if I heard that correctly, any motion that requires a 2/3 majority vote to pass is not debatable or open for discussion?
Oh, no. any motion that limits the right to debate is a 2/3 vote and is not debatable. And and in fact, in this part I'm about to start, I'm going to get into a lot of different motions in great detail like that. But yeah, that was my only point, was if you're interfering with the right to debate, it's 2/3 vote and you can't debate it.
I thought that's what I asked.
Yeah, well, okay, if that was what you asked, then yes.
Yeah, if a 2/3 vote is required to pass the motion, then it's not debatable or open for discussion.
Well, there are other things that would require a 2/3 vote that could be open for discussion,
I see.
like amending the bylaws would definitely be open for debate.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Okay. I can't see the chat box from where I am, so if there's no more questions, could you let me know?
No more questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're
very much.
monitoring for you.
Okay, thanks. This will be about a lot of details about all the different motions, main motions, and then your secondary motions. A main motion is the formal proposal by a member that the assembly act. A motion can also be called a question. It is the way that you introduce new business to the assembly. It's in order during the new business part on the agenda if no other business is pending. It can be debated or amended. An example of the format you might use when making a main motion is, I move that we hold a training conference at Fedora Conference Center on May 5th. That's a motion in proper form. The purpose of it is to bring a matter before the assembly on an issue that you want the assembly to take action on. A secondary motion is a motion that can be made while a main motion is pending. And some examples of that would be to amend the main motion. Previous question, oddly named, but what it means is to end debate. Say I move the previous question, that means I want to end debate, I want to move to an immediate vote. Point of order. That's an unusual type of motion in that it's not usually put to a vote, but the chair rules on it. It is your way of making a complaint that you don't think the rules are being followed. And it's a very powerful motion if you believe that your rights are being violated or anyone's rights are being violated, then that is what you say is point of order to get your issue addressed if it's an issue of rules or your rights. Appeal the ruling of the chair. That's another example of a secondary motion. With that one, if the point of order doesn't go your way, you can appeal the ruling of the chair and allow the assembly itself to decide. Suspend the rules. That is a very powerful motion because it can allow you to do things that are otherwise against the rules. It does take a 2/3 vote. It is usually debatable. It doesn't apply to all the rules of the organization. It doesn't usually apply to the bylaws, and it doesn't apply to rules of the organization like it might have to do with your employees and such. It has to do with rules that apply during a meeting. So if there's a rule stopping you from debating, you could quickly cut through that by making a motion to suspend the rules and allow debate, for example. Objection to consideration of the question is another secondary motion. If as soon as a main motion is made, if someone finds it offensive for some reason, they could immediately stand up and object to it being considered. That one takes a 2/3 vote. Anything like that, anything that seems like this is really gonna like take away something from someone that they would normally be entitled to, 2/3. You have to have more than just a majority to take away what normally would be someone's right. A division of the question. That's when you have two parts in a motion that can be separated and still both stand on their own. That would be a division of the question. Division of the assembly. Similarly named, but don't confuse the two. They're not at all similar. The division of the assembly is a type of voting. After a voice vote is taken, for example, all in favor say aye, all opposed say no. If it's unclear which side prevailed, then a member could call out division, meaning division of the assembly, which would then lead to a rising vote. Now, of course, in a chat room, or a Zoom meeting, these things aren't going to apply, but you may have similar motions relating to the way you're voting in a Zoom meeting. The privileged motions, it's important to know what they are because they're very privileged. They can interrupt pending business, and they are not debatable, and they are immediately voted on, or except for the first one, it's ruled on. But these are the 5. There are only 5, and it's these. Call for the orders of the day. That's what you say when the agenda is not being complied with and the meeting's not on track. There's 2 distinct situations I noticed this motion really being used. One is where the meeting has devolved into chit chat and everyone's just chatting informally, small talk, and the meeting isn't really happening anymore. To stop that, a member could call for the orders of the day, and then the chair should go, oh, sorry, I'll get back on track. Another situation would be if the chair misses an agenda item. And with that one, if you make that motion, you would probably give a little bit more information, call for the orders of the day. I believe we're supposed to be on a bylaw amendment. And then the chair would hopefully say, oh, yes, we are, and then get to that. But that is your motion to get the meeting back on track. Raise a question of privilege. That is where an issue of your rights in relation to the meeting, not so much the motion, but if you can't hear, it's too hot, too cold, something like that, there's something interfering with your ability to participate in the meeting. In a Zoom type meeting, it could be something interfering with your connection, but it's something that you need addressed because you're not able to properly participate. And then you raise that by telling the chair you have a question of privilege, which the chair addresses. If the chair deems it advisable, the chair could conceivably put it to a vote, but normally the chair simply addresses it. Third would be the motion to recess. An assembly always has the right to take a break when it wants to, or the right to adjourn. It can end the meeting when it wants to. The highest ranking of all the motions is this last privileged motion, to fix the time to which to adjourn. What that does is sets an adjourned meeting. If before the meeting adjourns, you realize that we need another meeting before the next regular meeting, then you make that motion. I move to fix the time to which to adjourn to tomorrow at 10 a.m. And then if that motion is adopted, then you have another meeting, an adjourned meeting, a continuation meeting at 10 a.m. the next day. That motion is only amendable as to when the meeting would be. Then there are motions that bring a question back. They are a type of main motion. And there are only a few types. Take from the table. That's if you earlier laid a motion on the table, setting it aside temporarily. You can make the motion to take it back from the table, and there it's in front of you again. Rescind. Rescind means to undo. It's just like you take a motion that was adopted, you bring it back up. I move to rescind that motion. Then when you rescind it, it's like it was never adopted in the first place. You can't rescind everything. If it's already been carried out, then it's not possible to rescind it. Reconsider is another one. At the same meeting, you can, if someone who voted in favor of adopting a motion has second thoughts, they can move to reconsider it and get it back up for another vote, redo the vote. Discharge a committee. If the assembly referred something to a committee and the committee hasn't brought it back yet, and the committee says, well, we want to go ahead and address that ourselves, the assembly can discharge the committee and resume consideration of the matter. As I say, these are types of main motions. They're not secondary motions, but they're specialized main motions in that they bring a previously considered question back before the assembly again. Now, any questions there?
We do have a couple of questions that came up.
Okay.
Can anyone call for a point of order?
Yeah, any member.
And do you have to second the motion?
Point of order, no, does not have to be seconded.
Mr. Ross asks, can you review the division of the question again?
Yes. Just a second. The division of the question involves a motion where it can be separated into two parts. If you have a motion that proposes two separate acts and both acts make sense without the other one, someone who would like to vote on them separately could say, I move for a division of the question. The assembly doesn't have to do that, but if it can adopt it by a majority vote. And then there are two motions in which you then vote on, first one and then the other.
Mr. Bernie?
Thank you. My question was, if a motion was made and passed at one meeting, and some people come back to the next meeting, we're not happy with that vote, what is the proper way to reconsider that vote?
How often does how often do you have regular meetings?
Once a month.
Yeah, okay. Probably rescind would be what I would go with. I would say I would wait for new business, and then when nothing else is pending, I would seek recognition, and then I move to rescind the motion, and then I would describe it so that everybody knows what I'm talking about. And I would do it that way. And then I would hope someone seconds it, speak in favor of it. But the motion to rescind would be what I would use.
Okay. Does it take does the motion have to be from someone who came from the winning side of that vote?
No, that on rescind, no.
Thank you.
Mr. Cinco?
Yeah, a follow-up to that question. I'm thinking about when a zoning or something of the sort comes to the NPU, it's voted on, and then the next step is for it to go to the zoning review board, for example. If what you're saying, if there's the possibility of rescinding, how does that could mean a perpetual challenge with moving that zoning issue forward. So you know how it goes to the NPU and then the next month it goes to the zoning review board. If what you were saying could happen, they could potentially rescind that right before it's supposed to technically go formally to the zoning review board.
Well, it takes if there's no advance notice given, it does take a 2/3 vote to rescind. So it's not going to be as easy as all that. But unless there's a rule to the contrary, or unless the motion is already considered carried out, then it could be rescinded. I don't know all the details of the situation you're describing, but if it was a situation where rescission could really cause a problem later, you could possibly put a rule in your bylaws, saying that once something like that gets to a certain point, it's permanent.
Mr. Stripling?
To that, in kind of piggybacking on that question, and this is probably something for the city planners or someone from the city to address, but if like that situation, because when it comes to the NPU, we're only if I understand correctly, we are advising or making a recommendation. The process is already in place. So if we voted on a situation on an issue that's going to go for the zoning review board, if it's on their schedule, our rescinding, assuming that it's successful to rescind the previous recommendation, would that have any bearing on whether or not that's still going forward? And that, again, that's, I guess, kind of getting into the timeline if something is beyond our control.
Yeah, that's more going to have to do with the rules above Robert's rules, the rules of the commission, planning commission. I would say once you communicate your recommendation to another body, you could conceivably come back and vote to rescind it, but they don't have to care. They could say, too late, you already told us. And then in that case, that would really, I would say probably fall into the category of too late to rescind. I mean, you've already communicated it and they're ready to act on it. It may be an empty gesture at that point to vote to rescind. It just, I guess, depends on when you communicate your rescission to them. How are they going to take it? Or they may accept it, or they may say, too late. You already communicated it to us one time, and we don't accept your rescission. That's going to come down to your rules, their rules.
Nicole?
So I thought that Robert's Rules of Order said that you can only do a motion to rescind or reconsider during the same meeting. Are you saying that you could do it at the following monthly meeting?
Rescind, yes. Not reconsider. I think you're right, but rescind, there's not a time limit like that.
Thank you.
I think you can actually keep going, Mr. Crowder.
Okay. All right. The life of a main motion. This will tell you about from the time the motion is made until the chair announces the result. You start off making a motion by getting recognized. There are a few things that that allow you to interrupt, but they're typically things that are urgent. The making of a motion is not normally urgent, certainly not a main motion. And the way you start is by getting recognition. You get the chair to recognize you so that you can speak. You start off by saying, Madam Chairman or Mr. Chairman, and the chairman would say, Mr. Daniels is recognized. Then you may say whatever you rose to say, in this case, to make a motion. In this case, you would clearly and concisely state your motion. Here's an example of the proper form for a motion. I move that we host a fundraiser at Unicoi State Park in July. States a specific act that the assembly would take. And if passed, the officers would presumably know what to do. It's not frivolous or absurd. We have a valid main motion here. So the next step would be for someone to second it. Another member will say, simply call it, and you don't have to seek recognition for the second. You can call out second or I second the motion. And I'll throw this in while we're here. The secretary taking the minutes does not have to note the name of the seconder. If no one volunteers to second the motion, the chair should say, is there a second to the motion? If there is no second, the chair declares the motion lost. After it is moved and seconded, the chair says it is moved and seconded that, and then states the motion. Once the chair states the motion, it is pending and cannot be withdrawn by the maker without the assembly's permission. That's important because before the chair states the motion, the member could say, I'd like to withdraw my motion, never mind, sorry about that, and then no harm, no foul. But once the chair states the motion by saying it is moved and seconded that, then it's before the assembly and the assembly controls it, and the assembly's permission is required to withdraw it. And the concept of the friendly amendment is relevant here because I'll quote Roberts directly on that. Regardless of whether or not the maker of the main motion accepts the amendment, it must be open to debate and voted on formally unless adopted by unanimous consent and is handled under the same rules as amendments generally. So meaning the mere fact that something is labeled a friendly amendment doesn't entitle it to any kind of a different processing. It's still just an amendment. The one exception where it might matter would be unanimous consent. If a motion's pending and another member moves, I'd like to make a friendly amendment. If in the opinion of the chair, it's an amendment that's obviously good and everyone ought to agree with it, like maybe to add a word that was omitted, for example, something that's common sense, the chair could say, well, if there's no objection, if we have unanimous consent, then we will accept this amendment with no further debate. You could do it that way, but that takes unanimous consent. After the chair states it, the chair would say, is there any debate? And then the members may debate. And while they're debating, they direct all their comments to the chair. They start off by saying Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairman, and then they state how they feel about the motion. The person who made the motion has the right to speak first. They get to explain it, what their idea is, why they made the motion, so forth. The chair then has the obligation to alternate between views for and against the motion if possible. Debate must be germane or relevant to the business at hand. You can't go off on a tangent. After debate runs out, or if a motion to close debate is adopted, that's the motion for previous question, it is time to vote. The chair explains the method of voting, voice vote, secret ballot, rising vote, etc., and members vote. The chair announces the results. Sometimes it's important to complete the entire process here. Let me point this out now. I have seen meetings where the chair stops early. For example, all in favor say aye, aye. All opposed say no. And then the chair simply moves on. The chair assumes that everyone heard the ayes had it and doesn't state the results. The chair simply moves on after there's only a few people saying no. The chair should announce the result. I've even seen it to where people stop after aye. All in favor say aye, aye. Chair moves on. That's all wrong. Now you take the no side and then you announce the results and explain the effect of the vote. That applies most of the time. There are exceptions. I'll give you an example. Well, first we'll review the whole processing of a motion, and then I will give you the example. The member is recognized by the chair. He states his motion by starting, I move that, or I move to. He receives a second from someone saying, I second the motion. The chair states the motion. It is moved and seconded. Members debate the motion. Is there discussion? The chair takes a vote. All in favor say aye, all opposed say no. The ayes have it with a vote of 60 ayes, 40 noes. The motion is adopted. Chair states the results. The treasurer will issue the payment. That's what I'm talking about, to state specifically what it is that's now going to happen. Because this motion was adopted, the chair might say, here's what we're going to do now to affect this motion. The chair should announce that part. Unless, say, it's something like a bylaw amendment, the chair would say, the motion is adopted and the bylaws are amended. And that's all you would have to say about that. There's nothing we're going to go out and do because the bylaws were amended, but you just state they are amended. Any questions?
Yes, we actually, Segura had her hand up previous. Segura, did you want to go ahead and ask your question again? I think it was, will you please review the process if a motion is not seconded?
Yeah, if the motion is not seconded, the chair, waits a second to see if anyone does. Maybe no one's thinking to do it, so the chair prompts, is there a second? If still no one seconds it, then that's a motion that only one person is interested in, so the chair would say, for lack of a second, the motion is lost, and then move on.
Amy?
Yes, thank you. You talked about the yays and the nays. You didn't talk about abstentions. Can you
Right.
talk about abstentions?
Yeah.
Who can abstain? Why would you abstain? I understand that if you abstain, that doesn't count, but what happens if you have more abstentions than you have votes?
Wow. That would be interesting. Abstentions simply don't count. Almost, I mean, the vast majority of the time. An ordinary vote is, for a main motion, would be majority of the votes present and voting, and those who abstain are not voting, so they don't affect the outcome there. In that simplest of cases, the main motion, if there are 100 people in the room, 5 vote aye, 4 vote no, and 91 abstain, the motion passes. Depending on the voting system, it may or may not count abstentions. If you take a voice vote, then the people who abstain simply remain silent, and no one really takes any notice of that, but they, for whatever satisfaction they may take, they get to know that they abstained. They sat there, said nothing, they abstained. The other methods, I mean, you simply just don't vote, but no one necessarily counts it or keeps a record. The only exception that's coming to mind are certain electronic types of ballots, and then roll call votes. If they actually do an actual calling of the roll, then when they get to you, you have to say something. You would say abstain or present if you don't want to vote, and they do make a record of that. But normally abstentions are simply ignored in most cases.
So are you allowed to abstain anytime you just don't want to go on the record?
Yes. The one exception would be if you're representing a constituency, it could be said to be frowned on. You owe them the people you're representing, you owe them your participation. But if all you're representing is yourself, then you have an absolute right to abstain.
And so
but
there's
even
nothing that can be done if I mean, we had one the other night. It was 4 to 3 to 2. So 4 out of 9, 5 out of 9 did not support the motion, but it passed. That just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, well, they didn't oppose it either. They just elected to not participate. So for that purpose, they just don't count.
Okay, and you can't, so because somewhere along the line, I felt like somebody said you could only abstain if you had a conflict of interest.
No.
Otherwise, you needed to vote.
Unless you have a rule to the contrary, but under Robert's Rules of Order, no, you can abstain.
Okay, thank you.
One thing that would suggest to me is people might feel like it's over their head. Maybe they don't understand it.
Well,
Just a
I
guess.
think they will abstain rather than voting against something. So technically they didn't vote against it. They don't want to, they're not for it, right?
Yeah, well, if things like that, if you think that something is becoming a practice or a bad habit among the membership, a new rule can frequently address that. You could have a rule requiring not the usual rule, majority of those present and voting. You could say a majority of those present. If you felt like that would help your cause and not be overkill, you could change, put it in your bylaws to say a majority of those present. Next.
Joseph Crawford. Also, if you have a question in the chat, just so I am not confusing what you're want to ask, if you could just raise your hand, that will make it easier, and I'll just call on you.
Thank you. I want to go back to the debate issue. How long does a debate last? And in a debate, are you required to give equal time for those who are against and those who are for the matter at hand?
Not equal time. That the only thing like that is the rule to alternate between pro and con if possible. Under Robert's Rules of Order, a speech and debate is limited to 10 minutes. Most organizations I'm familiar with have their own rule altering that, but if you don't have your own rule, it's 10 minutes. We at the Georgia State Association of Parliamentarians say 2 minutes. We think anything you have to say, get it out there and let us hear it. Don't drone on for 10 minutes. But yeah, under Robert's Rules of Order, it would be 10 minutes. And every person is limited to 2 speeches on the same issue on the same day. And that normally, that on the same day is pretty much only relevant to Congress. But so you can just remember 2 speeches per motion, and then you can't speak anymore. But there's no time limit for pro and one for con. It's the number of speeches and the length per speech.
Okay, so I think I hear you. So 5 people can speak for and 2 people can speak against, and that will still be in order.
Sure. If there's like if the chair just allowed someone to speak against, and then someone speaks for, and he says, okay, anyone want to speak against? And no one does, only people want to speak for, then he goes ahead and allows them. And yes, that's in order.
Thank you.
Nicole?
So I want to clarify amending a motion. The motion can only be amended by the person that made the motion. Does it have to be seconded by the same person, or can anybody second it?
Okay, a motion to amend can be made by anyone, not just the maker of the original motion. And then the motion to amend does itself require a second, and anyone can do that second.
Okay, and then for the vote on the amendment, is it majority rule or 2/3?
Majority. For if you're amending something not yet passed, amending a main motion that is pending and still not adopted, to amend it is majority vote.
Mrs. Fuller?
People often say, are you ready for the question? Is that just calling for the vote, and is that a proper way of phrasing it, or?
Yeah, when debate seems to have died down, just to make sure that it really has and that no one else wants to make a speech and debate, the chair might say, are you ready for the question? Meaning, are you ready to vote? And then if no one else wants to speak in debate, the chair could move right to a vote on the pending motion. Sometimes in response to that, people will yell out, question, and that doesn't really mean anything. The chair just ignores that. To make a motion to call the question or the previous question, you actually have to seek recognition and make it as a motion. That calling out question is just, an informal thing that doesn't mean much.
Mr. Strickland?
Thank you. For organizations that should have bylaws, but if you don't have within your bylaws certain guidelines for conducting meetings, such as what you mentioned before, in terms of having a timeline for debate and how many times you can speak for our guidelines, if you establish place, do those have to be adopted by the membership or the assembly, or should they just be written into the bylaws and then amended to the bylaws?
You could put it in the bylaws. There's another category of rules called your special rules of order, and those are your rules for your meetings that you want to supersede things that are in Robert's Rules of Order. Anything in Robert's Rules of Order that you'd rather do it your way, that's where you write a special rule of order. For example, the length of a speech and debate, for example. Anything related to your meeting rules that supersedes something in Robert's Rules of Order, that would be your special rules of order. And that's how I would, the kind of rule I would advise you to pass for that. You could conceivably put it in your bylaws. There's nothing really wrong with that, but I think it's clearer if you have it in a separate category called special rules of order.
Thank you.
Ms. Jacinko?
Yeah, back to the question that was about amendments. I wanted to be clear, I understood what you explained. The motion has to be approved first, and then the amendment approved and seconded, and then the amendment can happen, or you could say, okay, so here.
Yeah, you would have the, actually, let me see if I can share a different screen here. Let me. Ooh. Okay, there it is. The motion to amend, the usual motion to amend, is made while a main motion is pending. First, someone makes a main motion, a motion to, You know, let's have an educational conference June 1st. Then while that's being discussed, do we or do we not want to do this? Someone else might say, well, I do, but June 1st is too soon. I want to amend it. I think July 1st would be better. You have not yet adopted the motion. You're not sure you're going to do an educational conference at all, but someone is saying, if we do, I want to do it at this other date. So you vote on the amendment first. When the amendment's pending, you would confine the remarks simply to, should it be June 1st or July 1st if we do this? Then you vote that out. If the amendment's adopted, it becomes July 1st. Then you go back to the main motion, now amended. It now says July 1st instead of June 1st. And then that motion is before the assembly to decide, do we want to do this? Do we want to have the conference July 1st or not at all? That is the usual way. That is the normal motion to amend when you have a main motion and then you move to amend it while it is pending. Almost always when we talk about the motion to amend, that is what we mean. There is also, however, here, oh, it's not listed on, well, it was on my slide. Somehow it's not on this chart, but motions that bring a question back, motions that bring a question again before the assembly. One of them is the motion to amend something previously adopted, and that's a whole different ballgame. It's similar to the motion to rescind. It's because it has a similar effect. It changes something that the assembly already did in the past. You're going back to something you've already accomplished and saying, let's change this or let's undo it. In the case of amend something previously adopted, you're talking about changing it, but it requires a 2/3 vote or a majority with notice, because that's a more extreme kind of a thing, changing something you've already done. Changing something that's pending in front of you is no big deal, but affecting an action that's already been accomplished is a much bigger deal. So those are the two things to bear in mind, the two different kinds of amend: the normal amend when you amend a pending motion, and then the much bigger deal when you amend something previously adopted.
Mr. Ross?
Special rules of order. Does the general body decide on those, or do they have to weigh in on those, or can that be set by the facilitator or the exec board?
That would be, I think, the general body. It would be whoever has the power to pass bylaws would be the same people that would get to pass the special rules of order. And I believe that would be the general body.
Yeah,
yeah.
But in NPU, the bylaws have to be set by a 2/3 majority vote. That'd be the same for special rules of order.
Yes.
Mrs. Cuppersmith? Mrs. Cuppersmith?
Sorry about that. Yes. Cooper Smith.
Sorry.
That's all right. Not a problem. I just wanted to ask a question on the chart. First of all, do we get a copy of the chart? Because it's great.
This chart?
Yes, I actually sent it out with I know it's a lot of.
Oh, so that was attached?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I saw an attachment, didn't see what it was. I just came straight into the meeting. Thank you. When you are talking about motions that carry a 2/3 vote, like rescinding and reconsidering and things like that, something that you were saying made me think you can either bring that motion up in the meeting that is happening, or you are bringing it up in advance of the meeting to the chair. I mean, I could be mistaken, so I'm trying to get clarification when you were talking about that.
I don't think I said anything would be brought up in advance of the meeting. If that's what you said.
But in advance of anything.
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I don't remember what you're referring to.
Okay, so you have a piece of business that has already been settled.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How, and it's not on the agenda now.
Okay.
Okay, how does it come up?
Okay, and you want to go back to it again and rescind it or amend it?
Right.
Okay. Then you would if you could bring it up under new business at the next meeting and make a motion to rescind, it would take a 2/3 vote,
Mhm.
or with notice. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, so wouldn't,
okay,
aren't you saying you would notify the chair that you would
Yeah,
like?
okay, thank you. Yeah, actually the secretary, and the secretary notifies the membership. You would do that in writing. You would request probably an email. You would request the secretary say, I would like to make, and you'd need to get to them in time before they send out the notice of the meeting and the agenda. If they do that, you know, you can't do it like the night before. You have to give them a reasonable chance to get it out there. But you say, I would like to introduce this motion at the next meeting that requires notice. Would you please notify all the members that I plan to introduce this motion? Then they're supposed to do it. And then the membership has been notified, and you could make your motion at the next meeting, and it would require only a majority vote.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes, my question is about call the question. Do you have to, or move the question? Move the previous question. Do you have to, at what point do you know that debate has subsided to the point that you can make that motion?
Yeah, well, okay, if you're a member in the assembly wanting debate to stop, you don't have to wait for it to subside. You can just wait till there's an opportunity, like don't interrupt a speech. But if someone finishes speaking and you want to stop the speeches, you could seek recognition, raise your hand, get recognized, and say, I move the previous question. And even if debate hasn't subsided, the chair would, and if you get a second, the chair would put that to a vote. It requires a 2/3. So if there's very many people still wanting to debate, you probably wouldn't win, but you can make it anytime. And it's not, by the way, it's not always necessary. The chair, if the chair sees that debate has subsided, the chair would say, are you ready for the question? And then here's nothing and says, okay, we'll move to a vote.
Okay, thank you.
I was trying to go into the chat to catch some of these. Are there specific rules to follow during the debate?
Yeah, I think I've covered some of it, the time limits. Decorum is a huge part of the rules of debate, and that is my next section in the slide presentation. So I'm about to tell you all about that.
All right, well, let's keep it moving.
Okay. Decorum. The rules of decorum, the first one is members must confine remarks to the merits of the pending question. Very important. You can't just drone on about whatever you want. And it has to be about what the assembly is considering. I've heard people try to get pushback on this one, amazingly. They say, I have free speech. I can say whatever I want. But no, the assembly is the one with the rights here. You're all together for a purpose, and you have to respect the rights of the group, which is they're there to consider a specific thing, and that's what you're supposed to be talking about. So that is what you confine your remarks to, is that. And some of the other rules of decorum are sort of converse to this. They get into specifically what you're not supposed to talk about. They're already covered by saying that you have to talk only about the pending question, but there's some things that if you talk about them, they're so bad, they've got their own separate rule. For example, we're attacking another member's motives. Don't do that. You have to talk about his motion, not about why he wants to make it, or about, well, you just, want to make a motion every darn meeting. You can't say things like that. You have to criticize the motion itself, not the member who makes it or his motives. Even if you think his motives are suspect, there's other ways of addressing that. If you think he's taken a bribe or something, you could bring disciplinary charges. But in debate, when debating the motion, you just don't go there. Members must address all remarks through the chair. This one I see observed sometimes and not observed sometimes. It might be okay to relax on this one in the most informal of settings, probably not in an NPU, But and at small meetings of some organizations I'm a member of where there's fewer than 10 people present, everybody kind of starts talking informally and may even start talking to each other. And it's as long as there's no infighting going on, as long as it's all just everybody going through the business and approving things by unanimous consent, nobody cares much. But it's when things get in danger of conflicting, when you have factions, when you have people wanting to argue and the possibility of people getting upset. This is a very valuable device that is really the rule all the time, technically, that when a member is speaking, he only addresses the chair. Now, his remarks in debate may be for the benefit of everyone in the room, the assembly, but he still says, Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairman, I oppose this motion because blah, blah, blah. And he does not ever address another member directly. It's always through the chair. That I used to experience something similar when my children were small. They would, if there was some issue between them, I would be asking them what was going on, and they would start screaming at each other. I would say, no, stop it, talk to me, do not talk to each other. And it helped somewhat. I can see the reason for that. In a meeting, you don't get to yell at another person. You have to talk to me. I'm the chairman. You go through me. Another point kind of related to that, when you avoid the use of other members' names. You don't say their name when you're debating. If you want to talk about the person who last spoke, you could say the member who last spoke. Or if they have a title, refer to them by their title. It's a little bit less impersonal, and it helps to keep things formal so that people don't get as personal, and they're less likely to be hotheads when they have to use these formalities, like referring to people in the third person. Here's one. This one I see, it's probably the one I see violated the most, because a lot of times the chair isn't aware that this is a rule, or doesn't notice that someone's violating it. It's easy for a member to violate it without people really picking up on it. But you can't gripe about things that are in the past, things that the organization has already done. Like, say I'm speaking on a motion that's pending right now, and I say, oh yeah, we passed a similar one at the last meeting, and that hardly worked out at all. That was a disaster. I can't say that. It's a motion that passed. I'm a member of the organization. I'm supposed to be on board with it. All I can do if I don't like a previously passed motion is to move to rescind it, reconsider, etc., put it back before the assembly again legitimately. I can't go around talking smack about something the organization has done in the past. I have to respect it. You can, and again, that's also a corollary anyway of you can only talk about what's in front of you. Members, it's fairly obvious. I think we all know it when we see it. You must refrain from disturbing the assembly. Anything you might do, making too much noise, walking between the chair and the assembly, anything that is going to distract people. You can't do it, and the chair has the right to call you down for it. And here's a rule for the chair. The chair must be impartial and refrain from debating. Their job is to be the referee. They can't also be a player at the same time. And that's it for decorum. Remember those, and you'll have a civil debate. Any questions?
We do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Sagira asked, how do you stop someone that is attacking another person's motives? What is the language to use? And also, how do you stop the emotion from the past? So I think it's three parts to that question.
Okay. Well, give me part one again.
How do you stop someone that is attacking another person's motives? What is the language to use?
Okay. Situations like that, I mean, there is formal wording, which I could look up, but I would tap my gavel one time. It depends on who you're dealing with. If you know them, you know how stubborn they're going to be. Some people, that'd be enough. They'd be like, oh, no, did I mess up? That one tap of the gavel, get them back on track. If they don't know that they're doing wrong or why you might tap the gavel, you would say that the member will bear in mind the rules of decorum. It is not appropriate to question another member's motives. And then the chair would step back and hope the member complies. If they want to get unruly, then you've got a bigger problem, and our next class will get into those issues. But yeah, that is how I would remind. I mean, that is typically my wording, is the chair would remind the member of the rules of decorum. And a lot of times that's enough.
How do you stop a motion from the past?
A motion that has already been adopted at a previous meeting, but not yet.
I'm sorry. No, you were talking about how people will discuss motions that have already passed.
Oh.
And
So,
they're,
speaking adversely of a prior action. Yeah, same thing. I would say the chair would remind the member of the rules of decorum. It is not appropriate to speak adversely of a prior action. Thank you.
thank you.
Joseph. Oh, I'm sorry. Joseph Crawford.
Thank you. I want to stay on that just for a moment. Who should, who should come and say, who should intervene? Should the chair or the parliamentarian when you have a violation of decorum?
The chair. The parliamentarian should almost never address the group or its members. The parliamentarian 95% of the time should only communicate with the presiding officer during a meeting.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ross.
Yes, my question regards to decorum as well. You stated that the chair should be impartial and facilitate the discussion. What if the chair is dominating the discussion rather than facilitating?
Well, you're talking about the assembly. I believe the NPU itself.
Yes.
That's out of order. I should add in a small meeting, like a small board or committee, the chair does get to participate. They don't have to be impartial. But talking about the main assembly itself, that's where the chair does have to be impartial. And the way to the members' recourse there would be to make a point of order.
Okay.
And if I were doing that, I would find if I thought the chair might not know what I was talking about, I would find the page in Robert's Rules of Order that says specifically that, and I'd have the book open ready to point to it. And I would say point of order. And then when recognized, I would say, I believe that the chair is required to remain impartial during this debate.
And that would be somewhere in the rules of decorum. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if it did in Robert's Rules of Order, after it gets through those other rules of decorum I mentioned, it does say that. I think there's other places that may not be the main one, but it is in there at that place you're talking about.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can go on with the agenda.
Okay, well, we're doing pretty good. I wasn't sure we'd get to agenda, but here we go. Agendas are frequently misunderstood, I have found before, because a lot of times people think you can't consider a matter unless it's on the agenda. A lot of times people think that you're required to have a special agenda or to adopt one. You're really not, but here is all the lowdown on agendas. Some things you got to do before the agenda even starts, like the call to order. Believe it or not, that's not supposed to be listed on the agenda because it's not considered a type of business. It's merely telling everybody to settle down because the meeting has started. You do it, but it is not on the agenda. It is to do it on time so that they get used to it and know to show up on time. Takes one rap of the gavel. You tap the gavel one time and you say the meeting will come to order. Also, before the agenda, you establish a quorum. You can do that with a roll call or an attendance sign-in or physical observation. The chair could look around the room and say, our quorum is 20 people. I see there's over 100. I know we have a quorum. And he doesn't have to announce it or record it in the minutes. You just have to know there is one. Adopting the agenda. The president and secretary draw up the draft agenda in the first place, if desired. As again, I'd say it's not required. You don't have to have a special agenda at all, but if you want one, it can come in handy. If you think it works for you, it is the job of the president and secretary to draw it up together. It includes adoption of agenda as one of the agenda items early in the draft agenda. And at that point in the draft agenda, the assembly deliberates the draft agenda and may adopt it as its agenda, but it's up to the assembly. It doesn't have to adopt it. It can reject it if it wants to. It can also amend it if it wants to prior to its adoption or after its adoption by a 2/3 vote. Once adopted, it does become binding. If you do not adopt an agenda, and here's why it's not critical that you do is there's one in Robert's Rules of Order anyway that applies if you don't adopt an agenda. And it goes like this: minutes. The review and the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. That's the first thing you do. The next is the reports of officers, board, and standing committees. Then special committee reports. It used to puzzle me why the second item there has officers, board, and standing committees, and then special committees get their own line, but I found out it's because special committee reports are far more common than the other types. Special orders. Now that's something that has been specially placed on the agenda to override other agenda items because it's so important. Then unfinished business and general orders, things left over from an earlier meeting. And new business. That's my favorite one. That's where you get to make your main motions, present your new ideas. Keeping minutes. This will be the one time I get to mention keeping minutes. It's implied in our agenda that as we're going to be approving minutes of the previous meeting, we were keeping them at the previous meeting, and we'll be keeping them at this one too. So let me point out, when it comes to minutes, the main thing you need to know about minutes is it is a record of what is done, not what is said. It is a record of agreements, not of arguments. Now at this meeting, the one that our agenda is about, our first item is approval of the minutes. No motion is required. A lot of times you'll see someone make a motion. I move to approve the minutes. Sometimes you'll even see the chair ask for it. May I have a motion to approve the minutes? It's really not necessary. What should happen is the chair, after the minutes are presented or read, the chair asks, are there any corrections to the minutes? And then after the corrections are handled, if there's any disagreement about what actually happened, whether a correction is warranted, it's voted on by majority vote. And those are actually pretty rare from what I see, but after that's settled, then the minutes are approved as presented or corrected. No vote is necessary. Next item, reports. Officers, the board and the committees may give reports. These are reports on their activities in their official capacities outside of meetings. I see most reports probably pack in too much stuff. They may contain recommendations for action. They don't have to. They can be for informational purposes, in which case they are not voted on. They are merely filed. But if they do contain recommendations for action, those can be voted on and deliberated on immediately. Under the report section, you don't have to wait for new business for those action items if they are contained in a report. In a report of an officer or board, they should not put mere resume items. It's not what I've been up to lately. It is what I have been doing as your president or as your secretary outside of meetings where you weren't seeing me. If I'm president, I'm not gonna put in my report, I presided at all meetings. You were here, you saw me doing that. You don't need me to report that. I'm reporting back to you on things I've done outside of meetings, like the motions you passed. I got them carried out. I'm coming back to you to report that I've done that to you, not that I won the Peachtree Road Race, unless we're a running club or something that might be relevant. But just, I went and accomplished this thing for myself. That's not relevant to my job as an officer. And things I do in meetings do not go on reports because you should already know about them if you're attending the meeting. Special orders is the next item on the agenda. These are items that are required. This is one example of special orders, is items that are required by the bylaws to be handled at a particular meeting, like elections. Anything that the assembly votes to make a special order, and they could do that at a previous meeting. I move to postpone so-and-so and to the next meeting and make it a special order. That's a way to create a special order. Another one would be as you're adopting the agenda, the president and the secretary could put it on their draft agenda that they want so-and-so to be a special order. If the assembly adopts the agenda, then it is. Next is unfinished business and general orders. I sometimes hear the phrase old business. Robert's Rules of Order does not have such a category. It's unfinished business. And I sometimes hear chairmen ask, is there any unfinished business? The chair should not ask that. The chair should already know, because the chair looks at the minutes of the previous meeting. If he wasn't, hopefully he was there, but if he wasn't, he looks at the minutes and he sees, did anything carry over? Items on the agenda and not completed at the last meeting carry over to the next one, and they're unfinished business. Items postponed from the last meeting. Any item the assembly votes to make a general order or unfinished business would also be if a motion was pending when the previous meeting adjourned. New business. That's everything else. Anything you want to bring up. Well, one error I see people make sometimes is they think anything that the assembly has discussed in the past ever, whether it acted on it or not, goes under unfinished business. No. If you're making a new motion, it's new business. Any item of new business can be introduced when no other question is pending. New business is usually introduced as a main motion. Here's some more agenda headings that you might want to add on your agenda that do not appear on Robert's Rules standard order of business. Adoption of the agenda. Obviously, you're going to want to do that. Announcements. Everybody sees that. We all usually have announcements at the end of a meeting, but that's not on the standard order of business. I would add it because you probably are going to want to have some. Good of the order. You may or may not want to do that. It's like a town hall meeting. People get to speak without there being a motion present. It's also called open forum sometimes. Some organizations find it to be useful where people can get their ideas out, or if they have something they want to get off their chest, that's their opportunity. I can imagine at other organizations, it would simply be a source of conflict. So it'd be definitely something to think hard about, but many organizations do it. It's typically done at the end, after new business. Good of the order is. Program. That's where you have something for entertainment purposes, educational purposes, a guest speaker. If you have something like that, you definitely would want to put that on your agenda. And adjournment. Just like the call to order, adjournment is not really considered business and usually doesn't go on the agenda, but if you want to set a specific time for adjournment, that would be an exception. You would put that on the agenda. And that's it for agenda. Questions?
Yes, we have a question. Can the body vote on adding something to the next meeting's agenda, even if the chair would not like to propose it on the next meeting's agenda? Or does the body have to wait until that meeting to amend the agenda the president secretary has presented?
Great question. You can, but you wouldn't, that wouldn't be the way you'd put it. You wouldn't say, I want to add to the agenda of the next meeting. It doesn't exist yet to add anything to. What you would do is you would say, I move that we make so-and-so a general order for the next meeting, and then state what your motion or issue is. And then it would automatically come up, and they, when drawing up the draft agenda, they would include it. If they left it off, I would say, I'd bring that up at the next, I would say, well, you didn't put my general order on there. But that would be how you do it. You would pass a motion or make a motion to set a general order or special order if you want. You can do that too.
Mr. Jacobson?
Thank you. Clarification. Did you say there's no motion and therefore no vote required on adoption of the minutes?
Correct. Not a formal motion. There's an assumption that you're going to approve something because you're supposed to have a record of your previous meeting. And it's considered somewhat of an absurdity to simply vote the minutes down and not adopt anything. What you have in front of you without anyone making a formal motion is it's in front of the assembly, like automatically, almost without anyone having to make a motion. It's like Robert's Rules of Order is putting it in front of you for consideration. And all you have to worry about is, are you going to correct it? And which you may by voting on the corrections, but once you're done with that, it's approved by unanimous consent. And go ahead.
I would say, so you would then open it up and say, are there any corrections to the minutes? And then whatever corrections are made, that's what's adopted.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Crawford?
Okay, thank you.
Did you have your hand was raised. Did you have a question?
Let's see, I got off here. Okay, thank you. I had on.
Did it again.
You set an adjournment and you find out when you get to that point to adjourn that you need more time, what's the process?
There are several motions that would work there. Suspend the rules, amend the agenda. But it would take a 2/3 vote, but yeah, you could get that done if you needed to.
Thank you.
Mrs. Tropper?
Hi, just perhaps a minor point, but in the virtual meeting, there's no gavel.
Right.
What do you suggest?
Yeah. I'm gonna have to mentally get out of the brick and mortar rooms. Robert's Rules of Order is still there. I would, can't tap the gavel. I would simply, I might clear my throat, or I might just simply say the words. The chair would remind the member.
And bringing the meeting to order also?
Oh,
the chair brings
yeah,
the meeting
yeah,
to order?
exactly. Yeah, the meeting will now come to order.
Thank you.
I believe at what Mrs. James asked, at what point would you oppose the minutes before they get adopted?
I'm sorry, one more time.
At what point would you oppose the minutes before they get adopted?
Oppose the minutes? I'm not sure what we're saying.
I guess if you have a problem, opposition with the minutes.
You would seek to amend them. If something is wrong with the minutes, you would ask to make a correction, whatever correction you think is needed to make them accurate. It is possible to postpone them if you think that the minutes are so wrong that it's going to take a while to come up with the corrections that you need. It's not a requirement that it be handled right then. You could move to postpone consideration of the minutes, but where you can't end up is simply that the minutes are voted down and you don't have minutes. You're supposed to keep minutes of every meeting.
How do you stop someone from abusing the point of order?
If they're getting dilatory, meaning time wasting, and frivolous, meaning ridiculous, making points of order that they know or ought to know are not valid, or making the same point of order over and over, then the chair has, and again, we'll get into these in our next class. The chair has several recourses. He could, one option the chair always has with a point of order is to not rule on it, but to put it to the assembly. He could put it to the assembly, because it's the assembly that is in charge here. And if the assembly is being vexed by one person raising frivolous points of order, then everybody in the room is probably upset with this guy. So if I were chair, I would turn it over to the assembly and I would say, I'm going to let the assembly vote on this point of order and let him see that he is getting overwhelmingly voted down. And then hopefully that would allow him to see you're not going to get anywhere with this. And now that it's been demonstrated that the vast majority of the room is with me, the chair, I would not recognize him so easily. I would recognize other people seeking recognition, and I would not recognize the person who's seeking to delay the meeting.
Is there a version of Robert's rules for virtual meetings?
No, there are some rules for electronic meetings in an appendix in Robert's Rules of Order. And I will also, you may want to jot this down, anyone who wants to see some well-written electronic rules for meetings, which you could adopt if you find them, they fit your purpose. There's an organization called the Electronic Association of Parliamentarians, and it is an affiliate of the NAP. And it's like at the same level as a state organization, but it's not limited geographically because it's online. They have probably the most developed electronic rules out there, the EAP, Electronic Association of Parliamentarians. They've got a set for Zoom. They've got one for Google Meets. They've got different sets for every platform out there. So I would suggest you look at that if you want to find some really good electronic rules.
Okay, it is actually 7:30, and this is the part where Mr. Todd said he wanted to take a break. So we're going to allow everyone 10 minutes.
Okay.
Everybody come back.
Okay.
But we'll see everyone back at 7:40. See you at 7:40. everyone ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ross? Just saw that. All right, Mr. Crowder, you can go right on ahead.
You're on mute.
Thank you.
He needs to unmute.
Did you want me to do the bylaws portion or just go to Q&A now? Now you're on mute.
Since we have a little time, we can actually go
Okay.
into the bylaws part if you want to.
Okay, all righty then. Okay, now here is all about bylaws. Bylaws are the rules adopted to govern the organization. Simply put, that is your main rules. They serve as the contract between the organization and its members. They should be no more restrictive or detailed than necessary. Think U.S. Constitution. That doesn't lay out everything that we need to know to live in the U.S. It's the basic rule. It's the rules about how rules get passed, in effect. When you're drafting bylaws, it is very important to be precise, to make sure that there's no way to misinterpret it. Concise is very important. You don't want to say the same thing over and over in several different ways. You don't want a lengthy document that takes forever to read. You want something that members can use. You want it to be clear. You want to avoid subjective language, like where it's hard to say, did someone break this rule or not, because it's a matter of opinion. You want it to be definite. You want to be able to look at the rule and say, yes, this was complied with or it was not. The bylaw should have only one interpretation. Pronouns should be used clearly or avoided. Sometimes in convoluted sentences, it's hard to tell who he is or it is. So be careful with those. References to other articles and sentences should be clear. And there should be nothing internal that conflicts with itself. The whole thing should be internally consistent. Rules versus bylaws. Here is where we talk about the other types of rules that your organization might have that are mentioned in Robert's Rules of Order. This one I've already mentioned somewhat. It is your standing rules of order. This is the things that Roberts covers that you would like to do a different way. These are issues that relate to meeting procedure. They address issues covered in the parliamentary authority and they supersede it. For example, a rule to limit debate to 2 minutes per speech would be a special rule of order. And as I mentioned before, it could be a bylaw if you want it to, but I think it's clearer to have it be in its own category. Standing rules, those are not about meetings. They relate to the administration of the society. For example, rules on hiring practices or the society's building. Sometimes those go by other names as well, like policies and procedures. Here are the typical articles that you will see in a typical set of bylaws. And they are listed in order of importance. First article, most important thing is your name. And for that, you include your full, exact, and properly punctuated name of the organization. Right there, you get it right. That is what determines what your name is. Article 2 is your object, your purpose. You state the reason you exist, the purpose of your organization. That's important because you are prohibited from doing anything outside the purpose of your organization. Article 3 would usually cover the members. Sorry, I don't have my bullet points correct here, but here are some issues that would go in that article. How to become a member, the resignation of members, the procedure for termination, obligations due when membership is terminated. Those things and those sorts of things that relate to your rights and obligations as a member would be covered in that article. Termination of membership by expulsion, disciplinary action against a member, that too could be covered in the membership article. Article 4 is usually about officers. And you state what all the officers are that you will be planning to have. both elective and appointive. President, vice president, most people have. President-elect, I would say most organizations don't have that, but it's common enough that I see it sometimes. That's where you don't ever elect a president. You elect a president-elect every year or every 2 years or however often. Then that person serves as a sort of train. Elect. There are some advantages to doing it that way, like that you have stability in your leadership. You are prepping a person to become your new leader before they actually have to do the job. Secretary.
Mr. Crowder, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I thought it was maybe just my screen, but I think you kind of broke up a little bit when you started speaking in that.
Okay, what should I go back to?
I think it's that whole section.
Yes.
Okay. The officers are listed in their order. Your president and secretary, those are every deliberative assembly must have those two. They're always going to have that. Vice presidents should be detailed in your article on officers. You can have more than one. You can have, some organizations have a good many, 4 or 5 I've seen. And you can have different duties for the different vice presidents, heading up different committees, for example. Some organizations have a president-elect. That's like a president trainee, a person who serves as president-elect for 1 term, and then at the end of that term, they become president. In these organizations, you don't usually elect a president. There's an advantage to that in that you have some continuation in leadership. You have someone being trained to be your new leader before they actually have to do the job. Any organization with money is going to want a treasurer. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You're going to want a treasurer if you have money. You're going to specify that in the article. There's you can have other optional other optional officers like sergeant at arms. That's one possibility. You probably wouldn't in a virtual meeting. That's the person who helps the president keep order in a physical room. You might instead, though, have an electronic officer, someone to be in charge of monitoring the Zoom room. Your article on officers would specify these things, what the qualifications for the officers are, like how long they should serve as a member or as in another office to get to run for office. Any previous offices they need to have held or service as a committee chair, where they might be required to live. The duties of officers should be outlined, especially those that go beyond the scope of the designated parliamentary authority. The Robert's Rules of Order covers pretty well all the officers' duties during a meeting, but anything they're expected to take care of that's specific to your type of organization, you're going to want to list that in your bylaws. And you should not omit one, because if you do, that implies they don't have to do it. It should specify how candidates for officer are nominated from the floor or nominating committee or however, then how they are elected, the method of voting, secret ballot, preferential voting, which I'm starting to see used more and more these days. Write-in, everybody's entitled to write-in. The article should specify when a term begins and when it expires, how long it lasts. And it's very important to specify, either way, I would put the phrase or until their successors are elected, and or either that or and until their successors are elected, one or the other, because that would make sure that they stay in office if something interferes with having the next election. You're not suddenly left without officers. And whether you choose or and is very critical. If you choose or, that means a person can be voted out early without cause if you simply decide to have an election early. If you're talking about elective officers like your president, your secretary, and so forth, I much prefer and, because then they can't be removed until the actual end of their term, unless you do it for cause with a disciplinary proceeding. For lesser officers, I might be more or for committee members, I might be more inclined to go with the or. It's not such a big, it's not such a scandal to dismiss a member of a committee as opposed to it is to impeaching your president, for example. Term limits go in this article. I think they're important. Whenever I help an organization write bylaws, I usually put in or suggest a term limit of 2 terms. That I don't like tying the hands of a future organization much. I don't like a lot of officer qualifications. I'd like to allow an assembly the freedom to choose who it wants. But I think term limits are important because I have seen the temptation in a lot of organizations to stick with one person in one job because either the person that holds it or the group itself starts to think of that position as theirs. Oh, that's their job. He's always done that. And then they get entrenched in it. And I think that's not healthy. Thus, I think term limits are good so that at least a person has to change jobs. They can stay in leadership, but they can get a different position. It helps shake things up and it helps introduce new blood. How to fill vacancies. It's important to mention that in this article. Whether the board can do it, you might want, depending on your situation, if you could have the board do it if it's going to be that long before the next membership meeting so that you have officers. It could be done by appointment. Article 5 would be your meetings article. It would specify when you hold your regular meetings. What happens at your annual meetings? Like election of officers, if you do that. A special meeting. I think it's important that you allow for special meetings in your bylaws. If you don't, Robert's Rules of Order on its own does not allow for special meetings. You have to put it in your bylaws if you're going to have them. Special meetings, also called meetings, are a meeting that is not ordinarily scheduled and it has to be properly called. It has to be, it's very important that every single member get notified. If anyone is missed, it's not properly called. The call would describe the time requirement. In your article, describing a special meeting, it would describe the time requirement of the notice and how it must be delivered. Typically these days, it's from the secretary by email to the members. And they have to get a certain number of days. 30 is typical, unless it's an emergency, then you might go 5 or 10 if the chair decides it's an emergency. Describe what information is to be included in the notice, like the topic to be covered. Special meetings are usually limited. They're not, you don't have new business. It's not open to just anything usually. Your meetings article would describe your quorum. And when deciding on a quorum, you want to be realistic. You don't want to be stuck, never able to get a quorum. It happens to homeowners associations all the time. There are some that have had meetings for years where all they can do is read reports because they can't do any valid business because they can't get a quorum. In your bylaws, you state the quorum as a number or as a percentage of the membership. If possible, I like a number, flat number, because everyone can look around and tell that you have a quorum or you don't. If it's a percentage of the membership, you have to find the secretary and ask, well, how many members do we have right now? You may not be able to do that, or it may not be convenient. Article 6, the board of directors. Can somebody tell me, do NPUs typically have boards of directors?
Officers of particular executive board.
Executive board, okay, yeah, same thing, good. Then you would want to specify the board's composition on your board, certainly how many members, what it takes to get to be a member, and how they're elected. Say what the power is, very, very important. In your case, I don't think you're going to want to give the board full power and authority. Some organizations do that. The board has more power than the membership. I don't think you're going to want to do that. You would do this one, empowered to act between meetings of the membership, but not instead of the membership. The rules by which the board conducts its business, like when it meets, what its quorum is, and Article 7 is your committees. You don't have to have an article on committees. I think it's probably best to list the committees you know you're going to want to have and keep permanently. But I think it's very important. You do list the name, composition, members, and duties of each committee, of each of your standing committees, and you create provision for establishing additional standing committees. That's terribly important. If you don't do that, you can't, unless you amend the bylaws again. If you list committees in your bylaws, that means that's all there are, unless you specifically say we can create more standing committees with a motion. Special committees are, you don't list them in your bylaws. They're temporary committees, but you would state how they are created, who has the power to create them. Some organizations allow the president to create a special committee on their own without a motion at all. The president just has the power to do that. Some don't. Some require the assembly to do it. But a special committee is for a special purpose, and they come back and give usually one report and say, okay, now we're done. This is what you created us for. Here's your report. Thank you. Bye. And then that's the end of the special committee. Parliamentary authority. That is where you say Robert's Rules of Order governs your organization, and all other areas where you haven't made your own rule. Robert's Rules of Order is the one that I would say 90 to 90%, 5% of the world, well, not the world, of the United States uses. There are others. There's a partial little list of them. I could probably find a list of about 20 of them, but Robert's Rules of Order is by far the most commonly used and what I recommend. Your next article would tell you how to amend your bylaws. It tells you the procedure. The primary and secondary amendments to the proposed bylaws amendments are in order when you have a bylaw amendment up for discussion. And when you have a proposed bylaw amendment up in front of you, it can be amended by majority vote to perfect it before you actually vote on amending the bylaws. And that requires the bigger vote, the 2/3 vote. The article on amending the bylaws would describe the notice procedure, because the membership will be notified in advance of a bylaw amendment. That's important enough that everybody should know that it's coming up and they might want to show up for it. It would describe when and how the notice is to be given, whether the notice can be verbal or it must be in writing. Notices can be verbal. They can be given at a previous meeting. When it's verbal, you could stand up and say during new business and say, I Mr. Chairman, get recognized. I'd like to give notice that at the next meeting, I want to propose a bylaw amendment that would say this, and then you read it, and then you've given notice. If you put that in your rules, that you can do it that way. Your amendment article would specify the amendment at which bylaws can be considered. Usually that would be any regular meeting. Specify the vote and amount required for adoption. 2/3 present and voting with prior notice is recommended. That's the defaults Roberts has anyway. If you don't put it in your bylaws, but it is strongly recommended that you do put it in your bylaws. When you pass a bylaw amendment, it goes into effect immediately, unless you put it in your motion that there is a delayed effective date. I highly recommend this book for everyone. Robert's Rules of Order itself, of course. If you are interested enough that you're here tonight, I would strongly recommend that you get the full book, Robert's Rules of Order. I also recommend this one to everyone who goes to any meetings at all. To any member of any organization that uses Robert's Rules of Order, this is a very, very quick read, far shorter than Robert's Rules of Order. You can actually read the whole thing, and it's a lot less technical than Robert's Rules of Order. You might recommend this to your other members in your unit who weren't here tonight. Tell them, read this book. It's easy, and you'll understand a whole lot more than you ever have if you don't know what's in this one. I would say it's probably, if Robert's Rules of Order is 100 on the difficulty scale, I would say this is 30 or 35. So this is a good book for new people and for people who are members but not officers. And that is all I have to say today, unless there are any more questions.
So this portion of the class is actually open for you all to ask those specific questions that we didn't want to like hanker down during the class. So if you would like to raise your hand, just do that in the thing below. Sagira.
Yeah, thanks. When you were talking about the bylaws, what happens when there is internal conflicting provisions, and how do you determine what takes precedent?
if you notice it before it comes into play, amend it, fix it. But if it's actually it involves a matter that's come up and you have to decide, oh, which are we going to do? The bylaws contradicts itself. We don't know which provision to follow. One of the rules of interpretation says you follow the one that's more specific. That when a rule really nails something down specifically, that is to be taken down more seriously than a very broad general rule. If that doesn't resolve it, if the application, if you're still in doubt, if you say, well, neither one's really more specific than the other, then it's a question of intent. You don't usually involve intent. We under Robert's Rules of Order, it's exact words, plain language. But if that's not enough to let you know what to do, then you get into intent. And even then, you may not know what the intent is. These things could have been passed years ago, and no one knows what the intent was. But the bottom line is, it's up to the assembly to decide how to move forward, and it may have to decide something one way or the other. But if exact words doesn't work, you go with a more specific provision. If that doesn't work, then you try to discern intent, and those are the best things you got. But you got to decide something.
Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Lemmerhart.
Mr. Crowder, when you mentioned that sometimes it's okay for a chairperson not to recognize a member, I didn't quite understand under what circumstances.
Right. Believe there's a provision in Roberts that details that. I can't say for certain it's in the current edition, but it has to do with a member who is obviously behaving in a dilatory fashion, trying to hold up business. The chair, the Robert's Rules of Order suggests that the chair put something to a vote that this member is insisting on, show him that the vast majority of the room is not with him, and then, yes, he can show other members' preference and recognition over the member who is trying to derail the proceedings. It's somewhat of a blunt instrument. I don't really like using it. I would have to be 100% convinced that the person is trying to derail the meeting. But yeah, but if you know that that's what's happening, and you get that vote and you show that person, that the people aren't with you and you're still trying to disrupt things, then I'm just going to have to start ignoring you. Because as chair, I have a duty to everyone. I've got to keep the meeting moving.
Thank you.
Mrs. Schlinger?
You had mentioned that for NPUs, it's better not just to have the board be the ones responsible for voting or everything else, but there are some NPUs that only have that board in place. And there has been changes to bylaws, which makes it more difficult for some groups to join to belong to those boards. What would you recommend to those NPUs, or is there anything that should be done?
You're saying the board has equal or greater authority than the assembly itself?
The board only has authority except for the yearly bylaw votes, which are difficult to amend and sometimes are changed near the end, right before the vote, where the group works on them, and or for who's going to be on the board. Yet those are only nominated from the board members themselves on who's going to be on the board, because it has to come from that small group of people who are already the NPU, the groups that they recognize as neighborhood groups in that NPU based on history.
Don't you adopt new bylaws every so often?
They update the bylaws yearly.
Yeah.
And last year, the bylaws were amended near the end because what was posted was changed very close to the vote without having input from the neighborhood. And then they had a vote on it at the meeting, but no ability for people to change those bylaws. And the new version of the bylaws basically protected the people who are currently in the group from having other neighborhood associations join?
Yeah, I think that it sounds like somebody hijacked the bylaws possibly.
I
It-
don't know if they did or didn't.
that-
I'm just asking the
yeah.
question of
Mhm.
it, because the bylaws were written by a group and they became more protective, whether that's the protective is a good thing or bad thing, I'm not talking about, but it did make it virtually impossible for other groups to join or become part of the board. And that particular board does not, it is basically, because it's such a huge group, doesn't take from every single member because it's a very busy MPU.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, that I think that's sounding more like an issue of rules and ones that I'm not familiar with.
Issue
I'm
of
sorry, I don't
bylaws
think
and
yeah.
rules associated with the bylaws, both.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I'm ones I'm not familiar with. I don't think there's really anything in Roberts that's gonna address what you're talking about. I'm sorry. If I had the rules, I could speak more intelligently, but I don't know enough about those organizations you're talking about.
I believe Mrs. James is asking, how would it not be left up to interpretation as to if someone is trying to derail the meeting by calling a point of order?
How would it not? Well, if someone is trying to do that, I mean, if I'm chairing, I might start to suspect it at first, and then if I see him do it another time or two, it could be obvious, or it could be subtle. They could be trying to come up with something that sounds plausible, and but every one of them is not well founded. If they're, it depends on how brazen they're being, I guess. You could look like you're not dilatory when you actually are, or you could be brazenly dilatory. It just depends on the person and the situation. But it being open to interpretation, I'm not sure. I mean, to interpret the situation. Yeah, some are clear, some aren't when it comes to that, if I'm understanding.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, I don't see any hands raised. Hey, Hardin Ziegler or Ziegler? You're not muted. Or Hardin?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. In reference to Ms. Robbins' signature question, this might be a little off topic, but isn't the city of Atlanta their final governing body for the NPUs as to how they operate?
No. You all actually manage yourselves. We are here to just facilitate and provide guidance as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you then. I thought maybe she had someplace to go to. Okay, thank you.
I am trying to see if there are any more questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
My question is, it's pertaining to the bylaws again. And my question was, when I was creating my organization, bylaws can be amended to be changed if a board meets on them. So they asked me that I wanted, if something happens to me, that I want my organization to be taken over either by the government, the city, and it was written in the bylaws. So I had to go back and say, no, whatever city I'm in, I would rather, that the city planning commission or the city would be able to help my organization. I'd rather them take over, or, you know, what it may be. Is that the same way in the planning unit? That the bylaws can be amended and everybody can go back and change a rule that does not fit everybody?
Samantha, do you think that was one for me or?
Well, I
or for
was
you?
trying to gauge it myself.
Okay.
So I don't think, are you questioning in how to write something specifically for your organization's bylaws?
No, I'll say it again. I apologize. When amending bylaws, there's a clause inside of those bylaws can come to, you know, the board can come together to be able to go back over those, if there's a rule in the bylaws that is not offensive to anyone in the organization. Can they be amended?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yes, bylaws can be amended. By their, they usually would have an article saying how they can be amended. And so by whatever process they provide for, if they don't mention the possibility of amendment, then they can be amended with previous notice and a 2/3 vote.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, well, if there are any questions that we did not cover, I am going to send out the evaluation at the end of this course. And if you didn't feel comfortable actually expressing those questions, you can actually put those in that evaluation. Mr. Crowder, thank you so much. I'm actually trying to pull up my screen and so I can close out. Also, in regards to the Robert's Rules of Orders in brief, I put it in the chat, but for those who didn't see the message, if you would like a copy of the Robert's Rules of Order in brief, we do have those for participants of the class. You can arrange to actually come to City Hall. You don't even have to get out your car. We'll bring it out to you. It has to be on like a Tuesday or a Thursday, but if you can put specifically at the bottom of the evaluation in the other column, when it'd be a good time, and if you actually wanted a copy of the book, then that'll let us know and we can coordinate that with you. All right, let me give you all the rest of the information. So thank you again for participating. Can you all see my screen?
Thank you so much.
Can you all see my, okay, I wasn't sure if the screen was, okay.
Now we can.
Now we can.
Oh, okay, I was, sorry about that. I think after like 6 o'clock, City Hall internet does something. So thank you all for participating in NPU University again. And this is our installment of Parliamentary Procedures, our first course for the year. Next week, actually, we will have Avoiding Housing Scams and Reducing Property Taxes. We actually did this course for the first time last year with Atlanta Legal Aid. It was a really popular course. I recommend everyone who lives in the city of Atlanta, Fulton County, to participate in this course. It is next Thursday, March 9th at 6 p.m. And then at the end of the month, we'll be having our first course. This is our first time doing this course, Building Permits for Beginners. And this is March 30th at 6 p.m. That is also on a Thursday. In April, we will have
about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Sorry.
What?
In April, we will be back up with our wonderful Invest Atlanta, and we will talk about understanding public housing. And that will be on Thursday, April 13th at 6 p.m. If you want to know more information about any of our courses or just to be caught up on all things NPU, please follow or visit npuatlanta.org. And you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at NPU Atlanta. And we also send out notifications and updates on Nextdoor. So if we don't have any more questions, I am going to send the email out with the evaluation immediately following this course. So I look forward to hearing you all's feedback. And thanks so much for participating with us tonight.
You're welcome so much. Thank you.
Y'all have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good one.
Samantha. Thanks, team.
Very good, very
Thank
good.
you.
Good
night, all.
Later,
Bye,
fellas.
everybody.
Good ladies.
Remember Women History Month.
That's right. That's right.
I hear you.
Good night.
Good night.
Get on
night,
the
everyone. Be safe. Excellent
shameless plugs
class.
in.
Excellent class.
Bonsoir.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
I do have a quick question with the CIG requirements. Do we need to send an email or anything to make sure that, our representative for the MPU was on?
Well, I believe for the CIG, as long as it was one of the officers that participated and they let Tony know, then you guys can coordinate with Marquise McNeil.
Tony, okay, I'll just make sure to send him an email. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
I'll send you my PDF of my slides tomorrow. I got to correct that one slide.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good.
It's not gonna let you go.
Oh, wait, is there a phone number for Mr. Crowder? Yes, I will send his, but as far as like direct, if there are questions, so if you have a question that you like if he's on right now, so if you have a question that you want to like talk to him about, now would be the time.
Okay, I wrote that, and he did give us his email address, because after I review my notes from what was discussed tonight, this is Martiana Gilliam. I probably will have some questions, and I'm going to get that Robert Rules of Law book. So, and any other questions, I'll put them in your survey.
Thank you.
Like
okay,
always.
that works.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.